What are the commonalities among leaders who sustain excellence over an extended period of time? All right, this is a real treat. I am pleased to welcome Becky and Brett. It's great to have you both here on the Learning Leader Show. Welcome.
Excited to be here.
So let's start with Brett. I want to talk about Don Meyer. You met him at a time when Don was the all-time winningest coach. And one of the surprising things about Don was that he'd said to you that he's not real big on goals. Can you unpack that a little bit more? And because oftentimes we hear about high achievers and people who sustain excellence, and they talk about writing down their goals and achieving them and why it's so important. But this is the guy who won a ton of games, and he said, I'm not real big on those goals. Can you share more about that?
It was the first coach that had ever said anything like that to me. And then I had a project with Mike Krzyzewski, who passed Don Meyer, and he had the exact opposite viewpoint on goals, that he was very goal orientated. So to have one and two have such opposite viewpoints, I actually asked Carol Dweck, who wrote the book Mindset, I'm sure you're aware of, what she makes of that commentary. And she said that in sport, results are clearly defined. Life is a little bit more ambiguous. And so because of the ambiguity, sometimes goals can narrow the focus and create a collective interpretation of what we're trying to achieve. Whereas Brad Stevens, who's with the Boston Celtics, one of the questions I asked him is, what sets the standard for you in Boston? And he said, when you have that many banners hanging, tradition sets the goal for you. And you realize that that is the expectation.
What about this mindset of process over results, or focusing on the process? That I think of Bill Walsh and the score takes care of itself, and being married to the process, divorcing the results. You hear these Instagram quotes, right? Like, how does that apply now that you've seen it from all angles and different people and different perspectives?
It takes me back when I just got done playing. I started a basketball academy, and I spent the first 10 years of my life doing that, working with 5th through 12th graders. And we would meet once a week, and we realized that the only way that they would develop is if they maximized the time away from us. So the time away from us meant more than the time that we actually had together in terms of their development. And so we could have the best process in place to take them from point A to point B. But what we found is that if they didn't have the focus, the work ethic, the resilience, the courage to try these things, if they didn't have those things in place, then the process was not going to be maximized. So that really led us into our philosophy, which we call CPR, which is the character, who you are as a human being, drives the process, which drives the result. And we really put a lot of our attention and energy into the character development of the people that we work with, so that they can find the intrinsic value of pursuing that result, and then they'll work the process at a much deeper engagement level.
And Becky, I noticed that you actually set up a camera on your bench when you're coaching at the University of Florida for your soccer team, and specifically to
Ryan, Becky's the GOAT. Do you know that?
Yes. Oh yeah. I mean, and I'm excited to hear. Yeah, it's gonna be great. But you set up a camera. I was watching this video to see how your players would respond when they were taken out of a game, because nobody wants to be taken out of a game, especially in soccer, right? It's basketball, you get a little break and you go right back in, but soccer's different. Can you share more about why you did that and what you're looking for and what you're trying to accomplish by setting up this bench cam?
Sure. When I met Brett, I felt like I always had this idea of character development in my program. But when I met Brett, he really showed me a way to systematize that, which I hadn't had before. So it was kind of like this series of I guess, one-offs in some ways. And so working with Brett helped me create systems around it. And one of those things was the bench camera, because not only did the bench camera film the bench, it also filmed the coaches. So it was a great way to monitor mine and my staff's body language, reactions, communication. But for the bench, especially in college soccer, we have more people on the bench than we do on the field sometimes, most of the time, and nobody wants to be there. So you can understand where that could be a source of discontent, and monitoring that and trying to help people have good character on the bench was really important.
Hey, Ryan, she would show that to her coaches. Like
Yeah.
she would show it about them, and she would even do it with herself.
Wow. How did you guys meet, and how did you decide to be business partners?
Oh boy. Well, I actually met Brett through a guy on Billy Donovan's staff who's now the head coach of Oklahoma City Thunder, Mark Dignault. Brett and I had been listening to Daniel Coyle speak. I went up to Daniel Coyle after he spoke and said, "Hey, it'd be great if you were ever in Gainesville, Florida." He's from Alaska, so I didn't really think this was realistic, but you never know unless you ask. And he goes, "Oh, I was just there a couple of weeks ago. I was meeting with Mark." And I'm like, "Who's Mark?" I didn't even know who he was because he wasn't a coach
And
on our
she's
staff.
been there for 20 years, man.
Yeah.
So she kind of knows everyone at the University of Florida.
It's true. And I was surprised I didn't know who it was. So I actually looked him up on our little staff directory, called him up cold, and just said, "Hey, let's go get coffee." And then he introduced me to Brett. And then I went up to see his academy. And that's kind of how it all started.
Wow. Well, Brett, I'm sure there's a lot of people who want to work with you after the stuff you put together, and now you have What Drives Winning, and you guys do that together. What was it about Becky that you said, "Hey, yeah, let's do this thing together"?
It's the same thing you're seeing right now, that when you get with her, like she's so creative. She has a massive body of work. She's so creative. She's so collaborative. And it's like every day is a new day for her, to where it's 0-0. It's not resting on anything in the past. I think the thing that where it was most exposed to me, and Daniel Coyle, by the way, should get an assist because he connected Mark and I to begin with. So he's all woven into all of our stories as like the connector. And as what was the question?
What made you want to work with Becky?
Oh,
Like, what made you
yeah.
guys?
So, but she came up and was going to study footwork stuff. All right, for soccer, because I was teaching a basketball academy, and that's what Mark's like, "Hey, you should go look at this," because at the time that was the book Daniel had just wrote on the talent code.
Yep.
So just teaching, she was into that. And then we sat in the film room. I said, "Hey, you got to see what we're doing, though, to develop the character piece." We start each session with 15 to 20 minutes around interviews that I had basically brought with coaches to the athlete, and we're asking them questions. And it was like 3.5 hours later. And then she had a flight. She only had one day before the season started. And then from that point forward, she sent me a text every single day with the word revolution in it. And she's like, "Let's start a revolution." So her persistence, she's like a disease. You can't shake her. When she's on to something, man, she's on to something. And the coolest thing about her retirement, that's what I was going to say, is that it's very rare that you have all her athletes, her staffs that have worked with her department colleagues, and then her opponents. No one has a negative thing to say about Becky. And if you think about how rare, she might be the only person I know that I've personally come in contact with, and I would be right in line with everybody else.
Oh, that's amazing. So how long has What Drives Winning been in existence? For someone who has never heard of it, never seen any videos, doesn't like the cool look of it, which I told you about before we started recording, like what is it all about? What made you want to start it? And what's the revolution? Like, what are you trying to change?
Well, I'm going to just tell you this, man. When I started, so I was still doing this basketball academy. I loved it, but it was like, you're making $40,000 a year. You're working like 80 hours a week. It's all nights and weekends, and it's got a shelf life. And then Becky's like, "Hey, come work with my team." And I had not done anything beyond basketball, so I didn't really know if it would transfer. So Becky set up a meeting at the University of Florida. Linda Teeler, and she was the SWA with Jeremy Foley at the time, and we worked out a budget where they were going to pay me $14,000 for the whole year. And so that first year, I was sleeping in Becky's house. She had a guest room that I would use. The problem is I'm allergic to dogs. Becky has 4 dogs, man. So I said, oh, so I had all the Flonase, the Sudafed, all of it. And then I think that, we just met with every coach and just said, hey, here's what we're doing. Would you guys be open to a collaboration? And then they all had similar human related issues within their team. And they wanted to brainstorm with each other because obviously the roster is so strong there. And they hadn't really had a lot of times when you bring third parties in, they're trying to deliver a message of some sort. There are very few third parties that use that space to just open it up with questions and let the conversation go where it goes. And so I think that the value was for me to get in that room and learn, get out of the way, and let the intellectual capital take over.
Becky, how about from your perspective?
Well, interestingly, before I met Brett, I had tried to do something with the head coaches because I also recognized the capital in that room, but it just never really took hold. And then when Brett came into the picture and offered to do that, I mean, I think one of his best skills is his ability to ask questions and then build on those questions and go deeper. But also pairing that, he sort of referenced it, the ability to get out of the way and let it go where it's going to go. And I think very few people can do that effectively. And our coaches, I think, just it became almost like our group therapy. It was our ability to talk deeply about issues. And what was amazing was, besides the monthly meetings, it created this connection in between those monthly meetings where we could all rely on one another a lot more because we had these really deep and meaningful conversations. And that just created a cohesion that was amazing.
So that's
how 2014, brother. And I think, like, what are we right now? That was like, are we 2022? So we're 2022, December 15th. Yesterday, we just had a collaboration. We have like 70% attendance on an optional thing where all these people come together. And that's what, 8 or 9 years, whatever it is later.
Wow. So how many people, like, who's all involved in the, is the primary service and product you provide? I know you have the events, right? But you also now provide this space to have calls with people from all over the place, or how does it work?
Well, the Florida collaboration specifically, it's just we get together once a month for an hour. Usually there's a TV. Usually I'll bring a couple of videos and we'll just talk through what they see when they see it. So for example, yesterday, day 1, Division I football, when there was transfer portal opened up, 775, I believe, were on day 1. Previous high was like 211 or something. So you just show that, and all you have to say with a group like that is thoughts. And there's no shortage of thoughts.
And let me tell you what else there's no shortage of. It never ends at an hour.
No.
It always goes over. And it's like, we're kind of like people, we're at some point, somebody's going to need the room. So it really takes on a life of its own.
So a big part of those are facilitating the dialogue and the conversations, and then posing questions, and then pulling it out of the people in the groups. And this is how you guys are able to kind of like be the catalyst for the learning to happen.
I'm not going to say you guys on that. I'm going to say Brett, because Brett is the master of that. Like, I think his ability to build on what is said is pretty remarkable, because it always goes a layer deeper. And that skill it's it's a challenging one to have, and he has it in spades.
To that point, though, Ryan, what I would say with Becky is she is the relational glue for every department. And so she is, I think if you ask everyone how connected they feel to Becky, they will say very. And so it truly is, the sum of the whole is better than the parts with Becky. But these coaches are so busy because, as you alluded to before the call, one of your previous interviews, you see the schedule. So it's down to the minute. And so to give up an hour is challenging at this level. So how do you, as an athletic director, build a community of learners and build the relational equity if no one really wants to go? Because if it's just a holiday party, nobody wants to attend, whether they admit it or not. But if you have something meaningful that you offer alongside of it, and growth is the priority, then relationships grow from that naturally. So we had a staff over at my place last night because of that conversation. And then we deconstructed it further. And those informal meetings, that's the real value, is when someone says something that strikes a chord with someone else, and maybe they don't feel totally comfortable yet sharing with the group. What we've found is over time, just because they'll come back and say that they had a coffee and that's what got them through this period of time. That's where the real value is.
Do you work with people outside of sports, clients that are like in the business world too?
We primarily are in business, education, military, and sport.
Wow. So you started in sports, but then branched out because you realized this applies not just to coaches and not just to people who are leading a sports team, but leading any team.
It found me. So it would just be like, hey, will you come talk to this group? And, it didn't make sense at first. Like, for example, there's this TED talk that I gave. It was building your inner coach. All right. And it features a clip with Brad Stevens. And it's like with 4 or 5 seconds left in the game, and good and bad clip. He's neutral with his reaction. The fans are the exact opposite.
Yeah, the travel versus the guy making the game winner. That was an amazing TED talk. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the financial industry loves it because they said, hey, that's the market. It's really few people that can just stabilize despite this and not be influenced by the chaos around them. And so what's cool for me is I never have to get out of my lane because I'm just saying, hey, how does this apply to you all? Then you learn from them the unique metaphors that they create to unite their teams.
Yeah. Becky, there is an amazing story you told about dented like a golf ball that I really resonated with, and it stemmed from a speech that a Kansas State football player gave that then you kind of took it on for your soccer team at Florida. Can you share that story and the meaning behind it?
Well, before I even talk about the story, what was super cool about that was Brett was working with the UF golf team when that was going down. A guy came in and he had on a bracelet that was like in the shape of a golf ball, like it was white with the dimples of the golf ball on it. And so he asked him about it, and it was about a friend of his that had passed away. And so then Brett finds this speech that Denzel Goolsby gives at K-State after he wins an award, and he goes to the award ceremony despite the fact that he had just lost his father. And he gives this speech about golf balls and how golf balls were originally created as smooth. They realized the more they dented them and hit them harder and had all these dings on them that they would actually go farther. And so we used that as a theme with our team about, we had some tough losses that particular year. We were going into the NCAA tournament. And so those dents weren't to make us bad. Those dents were actually to make us go farther. And we actually had Denzel Zoom with our team also, which was really cool. And
Girls loved it.
They did love it. Well, he's also a pretty good looking guy, and I think they were trying to get his number, but that's another whole story.
And to that point too, though, man, like, remember how Becky is the relational glue? Her and Denzel still talk to this day. And how many years that was, that's almost like a decade. And
That's
they're
amazing.
still very much in contact.
That's amazing. This whole thought too of seeds, I think, Becky, is what you talk about. Like, there's a book called The Carrot Seed. I don't know if it stems from that or not, but I like that. One of the kind of emblems, you're always looking for metaphors, and it was like, I think it was sunflower seeds that you were holding up or you were showing in the picture. But that is really about like cultivating and watering it and taking care of it and being patient, because it takes time to actually grow. What was that all about when it comes to the seeds, and why that was important for you to have as part of your team mantra?
We're really similar to what you just described.
Yeah.
But I want to tell you, it was funny because I actually had a package of seeds in my book bag when I was out recruiting one time because of that. I don't know how that got into my book bag, but it was one of the seeds, that package of seeds that we had used in that presentation with the team. And I was sitting next to a coach who was talking to me about how he was just really, really struggling. And he had a young team and he didn't make the tournament, and he was just telling me all his trials and tribulations of that particular season. So I pulled out my bag of seeds and I actually gave him the seeds, and I told him the story about the seeds or whatever. Well, like 2 years later, I'm on the sidelines again, and he has the bag of seeds in his book bag. So I think I think what that shows us is when we can tie something to a metaphor, it becomes sticky, it becomes memorable, it becomes something that actually means something and not just something that goes in one ear and out the other.
I think that's
Hey, and you
exactly.
remember when that football coach, Becky, said they don't make Miracle Grow for that shit? And then he goes, he's like, so his message to the staff was, don't be the angry farmer that's yelling at the seed, grow faster.
I love it. I love it. You mentioned, Brett, earlier about character, and when it comes to the process, the CPR, and how the character drives the process, which then ultimately drives the result. And there are two things that make up character: performance skills and moral skills. Can you share more about this, the makeup of character?
Dr. Jim Lair is the person that turned me on to that channel. And he really helped me understand that you can operationalize these skill sets. And if you practice them, you can actually grow them. And he looks at them as character strengths because it's like a muscle that if you go in and you work a muscle out, it'll get stronger over time. The only difference we now use is we use the word relational instead of moral, because what we found is that one of the things that we're trying to reduce inside of the locker room is judgment, and moral feels like good and bad. And because of how people are socialized, their upbringings are so different. And so we've really tried to use the word relational and performance. And then performance is really self-focused and how you grow as an individual and a performer. And relational is really all about who you are as a teammate. And if you can grow your performance, character, and your relational skill, you will improve as an athlete and as a teammate, which will hopefully drive better results.
How did you get into this? Right, background playing basketball. That doesn't mean that you're going to be able to help all of these people and these coaches and be one of the go-to places and people and companies for this. Like, how does something like this happen?
How many people have you interviewed on this?
Over 500.
And I bet you if I looked at your catalog and I pointed at someone, because you're so engaged with what you're doing, you would be able to give me a quote or two from that interaction that
Yep,
somehow changed the way you think. Would you agree with that?
for sure.
That's all that happened. I mean, literally, when we started our academy, what I learned really quickly is that there were two things that I knew I had. One, I had this confidence that I can reach anybody. Like I never really had a lot of doubt on that side. On the other side, I had this extreme skepticism. Why would anybody listen to me? And when you have both of those, I think that they balance out really well. And what I had watched so many previous athletes do is they just constantly talk about, not in a bad way, they just refer back to the experiences they had to try and relate and connect with what the athlete's going through. Well, when you are looking for feedback, you can find it. And if eyes aren't locked on you, you need to get better shit. That's just really what that comes down to. And so I knew that I did not want to be a central point of the discussion. So for me, it was like all these kids said that they wanted to play college basketball. And I thought to myself, what if I brought college basketball coaches into this film room? We had 3 60-second pieces, and then I could just ask them what they heard, and then they could coach themselves. And then it was like a whole new world was opened up to me because they were engaged. They looked forward to it. And as we started to do it, because we did it for about 10 years, the people that would come back and visit after their time was done, they always talked about the film room. Like that was the thing that they enjoyed most. And it's because they had self-exploration in ways that they had never had up until that point in their life. And so you could see what resonated from a coach perspective with what they were saying. You could also see like, that doesn't really hit for me. But then for the youth, it's like, wow, like, let me revisit that and figure out why that's so relevant. And then if you're just open to all walks, it refines your perspective.
It's like you're have this open mind and curiosity to learn and share and facilitate the learning in other people, and that's an attractive place to be. Like people are attracted to that and want to be there, it feels like.
When they don't, it's like, what's it like to be in a room with someone that has all the answers? Like no one kind of wants that, you know? And so it's like, if you're there to just explore, think about what you're modeling as a coach in that too. And so many coaches, especially coaches early on in their leadership journey, feel like, well, I have this title, I need to have these answers, otherwise I don't have the credibility. And what I've found is that it almost works exactly the opposite. That if you say, hey, let me get back to you on that one, I need to think about it, they're looking at you like he doesn't have the answers, and he's going to come back and he's going to throw some suggestions. And again, if you just think about what you're modeling to them, they have not experienced a coach like that. So you're expanding their frame of reference, which will hopefully perpetuate if they decide to get into coaching.
Yeah. Becky, how about you? What do you think about this?
I think Brett's really right about that. Like, for one, people like to talk about themselves. And I say that on both sides, right? So sometimes, like I have this great amount of experience as a soccer coach over 30 plus years. It'd be easy for me to want to share that, but it's not really relevant to anyone but me because no one else is walking my path. But then on the flip side of it, like if I'm coaching a group of, athletes, they want to learn about themselves. They're engaged about themselves. So once you create that platform for them to have that self-discovery, which is what the questions do, I think all of a sudden they realize that they're not by themselves. I think we saw that in that we had a pilot class this semester at the University of Florida with 30 UF athletes. That was probably the biggest takeaway for the athletes was like, I am not on my own with this. And I think we see the same with coaches. Coaches it's a lonely profession. And when you start asking questions and see that the same hands are going up around the room, like we're having a shared experience, it just makes people feel a lot more comfortable.
Both of you, it seems like questions are a big part of how you operate and how you run the show and create this self-discovery. What are some of your favorite questions to ask that seem to elicit the most thought, that seem to elicit the most discovery? Brett, you want to go first? Of like, how do you approach these rooms, whether they're in person or you're on Zoom like this? What are some of your favorites to ask and why?
Bill Belichick taught me a lesson around this because what I realized when I would ask him questions, like if I sourced the idea, there would be a natural resistance because it didn't align with his framework. And so what I learned to do is to say, all right, you said this. Can you deconstruct that a little further? Can you deconstruct that a little further? There are 100 ways to ask that question. And that's what I'm ultimately trying to do, is to active listen, to hear the phrases they're using. So you can say, hey, when you say this, what do you mean? Can you break that down a little bit further? Interesting. As you say that out loud, what do you think? And the conversation comes alive.
How about you, Becky?
Well, I would say to you that Brett is really, really, really good at this. And when we're teaching this in our high performance classes, even for grad students, it's a skill that they have never explored before. And I had to learn it. I mean, I was a coach. I'm a teller. We're great at that. We're just not very great at asking. And so trying to change my mindset from telling to asking was the first step. But then when you see the people who are trying to make this switch, the hardest part is removing themselves from the conversation, getting out of the way and allowing the person that they're facilitating with to have the stage. And so those questions, the shorter you can make those and the more poignant and how do they build on each other, I think that's a skill that when Brett does it, he makes it look super easy. For the rest of us, we just have to keep practicing.
One of the things that comes up frequently in athletics is we lose a point, we lose a game, we have temporary failures. It happens all the time. Adversity strikes. If you play sports, you really do anything, it's going to happen. And I think one of the things I was reading about is how to recover or how to bounce back from that. And this goes for either you can tackle or both. I'd love to hear when it comes to creating a failure recovery system for yourself, whether you're an athlete or you're working in the business world. What's your overall mentality on a failure recovery system?
Hey Bex, I'll set it up for you because you were a practitioner around it. One of the things that I've seen is that college coaches, they are not nearly as good at handling failure as pro coaches. Because in pro coaching, we'll just look at the NBA because my background is basketball. You lose a lot because the margin is so thin in that world. And so in the college world, and I think that to Becky's earlier point, a lot of college coaches are tellers because there's an inherent authority that comes with that situation. So if you're telling someone to do something, you are relying on your authority. That means you have the power. If you have the power, that's really where the criticism is going to get directed. And so your ego will naturally be more attached in those situations. And so it's easier to take things a lot more personal. And when you take things personal, abnormal behavior can be projected onto your teams and you can zap the energy in the room. Pro coaches have to season their responses. They naturally don't have the authority. And so what's interesting to me is what would happen in a college atmosphere. A lot of times, if you had one of those at the pro level, two for sure, you're losing the locker room. And there's a natural governor that happens when you don't have the power, that you have to learn how to be more sophisticated. So I just had a coach, Becky, I haven't shared this with you, call me 2 nights ago, just saying, hey, what do I do? I'm new. I'm not aligned with my head coach. How do I navigate this thing? Because it's crazy. And the reframe was, if you want to manage at the highest level, which this person's very talented, you have to learn how to influence the future behavior of people more powerful than you. Why not get the reps now when no one's watching to help you and prepare you for way more complicated situations down the line? And I would say it's the exact same with adversity, that if you can learn how to self-regulate, that to me, if you can't self-regulate with adversity, what are you modeling? What if everybody responded the way you respond as a head coach? How dysfunctional would the organization be? So you have to expand their frame of reference to show them this is how we recover from losses. Because so many athletes, as Becky knows, will say, "Oh, I'm pissed until I can play again." Think about how much negative energy, and if you could turn the page sooner, you could get to a healthier channel. Becky, I know you were a pro at turning the page.
I don't know if I was a pro, but I definitely tried to be aware of it. And I think that's half the battle. It's like the old days. I know when my college coach, like if we got on the bus after a loss, you better not say a freaking word, because like it's a morgue until you get home at least. And I'm all for reflection. I think reflection is a huge part of growing, but I'm also not all for letting a team beat us twice because we have a hangover from the last game while we're still playing the next game. And so I think Brett hit the nail on the head with the modeling piece. Like as a coach or as a leader of anyone, if you're still stuck in the past, whether that's 10 seconds in the past in a game setting or 2 weeks in the past because you lost a client, like you're not in the present. And you cannot get things done when you're living in the past.
And Ryan, one of the practical things that you guys can do, like it's so easy to happen, like to create the plan prior to being in the emotional cauldron of the situation. So do you think you're going to lose this year? Yes, most likely. What do you want your response to that loss to look like? How do you want to be able to turn the page? What do you want your routine to be around that so you can model to your athletes what you want their failure recovery system to be?
The Brad Stevens video you mentioned earlier that you showed during one of your TED Talks is kind of like bringing this to life to me, because it's one thing to say, okay, I understand I'm the emotional thermostat for my team, so I'm gonna be poised and calm. I played quarterback in college and in the Arena League, so I understand a little bit about like how you have to, even if you get a bad play call, but you got to call it with confidence, right, to your other 10 guys in the huddle. Or you get sacked, you can't just start yelling at your lineman and losing it. But when I saw him respond, how the guy traveled, and it was like, no big deal. And then I saw him respond when they hit a game winner and the whole arena is bananas and he calmly walks over to shake hands with the other coach. You've talked to him quite a bit, Brett. Like how do you put that into play and not be overwhelmed by the moment?
There's a great line: as perception changes, behavior follows. So there are certain people that I've met that they are just computing the next thing because they're pros, and their behavior is just naturally following that. I think that the challenge for you as you think about your quarterback days is like coaches can be great actors. So I get a call, it's like, all right, let me sell this. You sell it. And then after the game, as you reflect on some of these things, there's like an internal experience that's happening. That to me is what I'm most interested in exploring with coaches is how often do you feel peace of mind during the season? Not very high. Do you want to feel peace of mind? Yes. Why don't you? Because I'm letting the outside factors dictate my quality of my inner experience. And I think the more that coaches can work on their inner experience, that for us onlooking those situations, it's just like, how are they that? They don't process it that way. They're not thinking they're calm or not. They're just doing the next right thing over and over and over. And that's what pros do.
This play green mentality, Becky, can you share more about what it means to play green?
Yeah, that play green is exactly what Brett just described, like doing the next right thing. Because when you're playing yellow, it's very caution. You're not full speed, you're tentative. Maybe it's because you're overthinking, maybe it's because you're not clear on what you need to do. But when you play green, you're playing free. You're playing at full speed and you're getting after it. And that is going to have some inherent risk in mistakes because you're playing at a fast speed. So the question becomes when you're playing green, like, how do I support that as a coach, or how do teammates support that with each other? So a mistake happens. Are we able to move that person to the next right thing as quickly as possible? Or are we going to hold them in yellow or even red for some cases where we're just like putting our hands up and, having bad body language and still talking to them about the play that happened 15 seconds ago, when the game is continuing. And in my sport, the game doesn't stop. So it is just a mindset of like, can you get to the next right thing as quickly as possible? And, we talk about next play speed. What is your next play speed? Is it immediate? Is it 1 second? Is it 10 seconds? Does it take you a whole game to get over things? Like, where are you with your next play speed?
It feels like
Hey,
that
Ryan, you're a quarterback.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I was.
Okay. Yeah. Let's make it very clear. I was a quarterback. Not anymore.
I mean, I can still throw a little bit, but not that well.
All right. Here's my question. So Jalen Hurts. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're watching Jalen, all right, and you're just looking at him purely from a football specific lens, and who's the best quarterback in the league for you?
I mean, him and Mahomes this year.
Okay. So let's talk Mahomes. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you think about all his physical tools with the football. All right. Would you rate him at a scale of 1 to 10? Would you rate him a 10?
Mahomes?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is he the most talented?
Probably.
Just talking football, not this. Just talking football. Is he the most talented guy in the league?
Probably, yeah.
Okay. So if he's a 10 from just a football specific lens with Jalen, what would you rate him?
Man, pretty high. He can run and throw. He's gotten a lot better. He's close to that. He's right there.
So I asked the room of football players. They thought he was a little bit lower. Okay. I'm not, I'll just put it. They said 6.5. Now, again, I'm not going to say who, so they're not.
He might win the MVP this year, man.
Well, that's my point. Okay. So check this out. So again, that's football, right? So basketball is my background. All right.
Yeah.
So let's look at Giannis.
Okay.
All right. Giannis airballed 2 free throws in the final, like the same quarter kind of thing. All right. So if you ask basketball players, basketball specific skill, where is Giannis at right now? They will say probably a 6.5, 7, same thing. Because they look at it like Kevin Durant can do all these different things. And you're seeing Giannis every year he's adding to his game, right?
Yeah.
So if Kevin's at a 10, Giannis is on his way towards closing that gap, but there's a lot of room for growth there. So the question then is, how can he be a back-to-back MVP if guys in the league will say this is where he is from a basketball player? And I think it's the mentality is what makes him different. Because if you ask who's more skilled, Kevin Durant or Giannis, you will not find an NBA player that will say Giannis. Yet the way he just moves to the next thing unaffected, because he's the best player on a championship team, the locker room comes with him. And you can stay in Milwaukee, a small market franchise, and create something beautiful if you can build your organization around that DNA. And I will say in that sport, that franchise has followed his development. And it literally, your best player, he set the standard and it becomes the standard.
It reminds me of Kobe and the documentary, The Redeem Team, when the guys were coming in from the club, basically the whole team, and they see Kobe's headed to the gym as they're getting home from the club, and they all just looked around at each other and was like, this guy's different. And it changed the work ethic of all the other superstars in the league because they saw the best what he was doing. And to me, it's like that, talk about like creating waves and seeing the wake that you leave behind you. Like that impacted so many people, just that one experience.
That's what I think about Jalen, man. Like whatever he is, and I'll let the football people say whatever he is. Okay. Let's say they give him a much higher score. The thing that makes him so unique from my perspective is he's an American kid and he still has the mentality that he has. It's easy for Giannis to have that mentality, easier because he didn't become what he didn't even know what the NBA draft was. Most of the guys in the league have had cameras on them since their seventh grade. So it's a completely different socialization when you're the center of that world, right? And so for Jalen to have his father who's a coach, and then I was at Oklahoma when he came over to Oklahoma from Alabama. And just to see what his example did from a mentality standpoint on how he has a way of imprinting his DNA on the program in a way that he sets the standard.
Love it. This has gone by super fast, but I have one more kind of parting question for both of you. I like to start with Becky for this one, and that is, let's say like this is a group of people that you see a lot. So hopefully, I'm sure this question has popped up. But somebody who's like early to mid 20s, they're getting their career started. They graduated, they're getting their career started. They're not quite sure what they want to do, but they definitely want to leave a positive dent in the world, their own version of a dent in the world, right? They want to do good. They want to add value, right? But they're not quite sure. What are some general pieces of life/career advice you'd give to that person?
Ooh, that's a tough ender. uh, I think that if you follow your passion, I know this sounds really cliche, but if you follow your passion, you can find ways to make that work for you in any field. Like I knew as soon as I got to college that I wanted to be a coach. I kind of thought I did before college, but I didn't really have anyone showing me the way because all my coaches were, someone's mom or dad that was part-time. I get to college, I see my full-time college coach, and I'm like, that's what I want to do. And there was really no support around to do that. Like I didn't know anyone else who did it. My parents did not think coaching was a real job. And it was just like unheard of. Like, why would you, like, no one goes to school to be a coach, a college coach, But I really was so passionate about it. And I think once I displayed my passion, that turned into commitment and focus and work ethic and to try and like find all these channels and angles to get this done. And then that turned into a career and a life, kind of like a lifestyle, because coaching is a little bit of that. So like, was that my plan? I mean, I would say it's what I wanted to do, but did I have any idea? No. But I think that your passion is what kind of can guide you in a way. If you choose something because of someone else, or you choose something because it's like what people say you should do, I just think it's hard to be really good at something like that. I think you kind of just end up doing what you need to do instead of really feeling it. And so my biggest piece of advice in the end would be to do it because it's what you want to do, regardless of whether it's been done before, regardless of whether it's lucrative, regardless of whether it's, what everyone's telling you to do.
I love it. How about you, Brett?
So I'll piggyback on Becky. So if hers is all about finding and following your passion, like once you're in that space, where I would add is the best I've ever been around don't give a shit about their legacy. Legacies for the ego. And I think that if you think about, we did this really cool exercise with a coach and his team, and we asked the team, best lesson you've learned from this coach. And they all said how to be a good husband and how to be a good father. And later that day, I saw the coach. I shared the answers with him. I just said, how many conversations have you had on this? And he said, 0. And what that teaches me is that they're paying attention. The lessons you're teaching are caught with their eyes more than heard with their ears. And so if you can just make it about being your healthiest self, the best thing you can give to someone else is a strong example. And I think when we focus inward on physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health, and really trying to grow those areas as we're pursuing excellence, that stands out. And people will take whatever they take from that example without you having to say a word.
Really good. I really appreciate that. And this has been just a really fun talk. On a side note, I love the, probably shouldn't even say this now, but
Becky's got like 10 thoughts coming to him at once, man. He's like, which one do I grab?
no, I was just going to mention, I love like the branding of what you guys do. I love the coloring. We're all in black here. I love the website, What Drives Winning. I'm just curious, you must have thought all of that through. The look of your videos are unique and different. The look of the website.
Out to, man, here's what happened. You ready for this, man?
Okay.
I went to a school and they said, why the hell are you wearing that color? And I looked down and I'm like, oh, I could see how that could be offensive. And from that point forward, I just said monochromatic, minimize the headaches.
But I mean, it works. It works. It looks good.
Shit, Becky, is that a fashion compliment?
It is. I like it. No, this has been great. Where would you send my viewers and listeners to learn more about you guys online?
I would say whatdriveswinning.com. And then I would say that I've written 4 books. The 5th one's on its way. All of those books have been converted into a graduate level course at the University of Florida. Becky and I teach the course at the University of Florida. It's a certificate program through health and human performance. And I can just tell you, man, like, that's probably been one of the neatest ventures that I've been a part of with Becky. Becky, you want to share on that?
Yeah, I really do love it. It's basically a certificate in high performance coaching. And so whether you're going to be a sports coach or any type of, if you're going to lead anyone, it's meant for that. But most of the people who are in it are practitioners. So it's online, accessible to everyone. But the cool thing about that is you just get so many different perspectives because there's so many different practitioners in the course.
Wow. How long you guys been doing?
I love it. Like, we had a couple people that couldn't turn their camera on because they're at the Pentagon.
Really? Wow.
We've started that in the last fall. So this is our 2nd fall doing it. We do fall, spring, and we'll start summer this year.
Well, I really appreciate your time investment today. It was awesome. And I would love, if you guys are up for it, to continue our dialogue as we both progress.
Absolutely, man. We
All right.
respect what you do.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you.